And we're beginning this hour with updates from the war in Ukraine, where a regional governor in that country says 6 people have been killed in missile strikes on Ukraine's western city of Lviv. Russia says it hit hundreds of Ukrainian military targets during the overnight attacks in several different regions. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is promising not to give up territory in the east of the country to end the war with Russia, as Ukrainian forces in Mariupol continue to hold out after a Russian deadline to surrender passes. Outside Ukraine, about 200,000 people risk losing their jobs in Moscow because foreign companies have suspended operations or decided to leave the Russian market, according to the Russian capital's mayor. And to discuss this latest attack, L. Anthony Wayne, who is a senior advisor, Center for Strategic and International Studies on Prosperity and Development, joins me from Washington, D.C. via Zoom. He was also a former Assistant U.S. Secretary of State on Global Affairs, as well as a former U.S. Ambassador to Mexico and Afghanistan. Good to have you join us.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
When you look at what's going on now in Ukraine, Russian troops are pulling out of the capital, Kiev, and they are now regrouping in the east. How do you think, or how would you characterize that move by Russia in terms of whether it is a new phase in this war?
Well, I think Russia is refocusing its forces to launch a major offensive from the east of the country and to, at a minimum, try to capture the areas along its border that it has claimed in the Donbass, and then to have a land link between Crimea and that area of Ukraine and Russia. And so right now, both sides are getting ready for what they expect to be a major Russian offensive.
Mariupol is also under attack. Odessa, I understand, is the prize here. Because of the value it holds in terms of economic value it holds for Ukraine. What would happen if Odessa were to fall to Putin?
If Odessa were to fall, Ukraine would be sealed off and landlocked. And so that would be a major problem for Ukraine. It would also be a major problem for the world because much of the world's grain foods comes out from Odessa, as Ukraine is a major producer. And the fall of Mariupol would free up Russian communications and logistics lines from Russia down to Crimea and moving toward Odessa. So that would be a major step forward for the Russians in their fighting also.
When you look at this war, especially with your experience as the former Assistant Secretary of State on Global Affairs, what's your key takeaway in terms of how the international community has continued to react to this war, whether in terms of sanctions or provision of ammunition to Ukraine?
Well, it is actually a major turning point in the way we all see the world. In the United States and Europe and other places, this has really drawn people together. If one of Putin's desires was to weaken NATO, he's actually pulled NATO closer together. And a couple of states that have not joined NATO in the past, Finland and Sweden, are now looking to move to join them because of this. Also, many other countries are coming together because they see this as a moment to decide, can you allow an autocracy to just attack another country, to slice up what it wants in that country? Are there rules of the game anymore in international affairs, or are those going to be pushed aside? So it really is a key moment in deciding what kind of a world we're going to have in the future. And that's why so many countries in different levels are joining together. Some because they feel threatened directly, some because they see democracy and the rights of sovereign nations being threatened by this conflict.
And let's talk about the Sweden, the intention, or let's use it as a proposal of Sweden and Finland to join Ukraine. We understand that that's in the works. It hasn't happened yet, but that's because of security guarantees, seeing what Putin is doing in Ukraine. But during one of the talks, I think in March, there was a report that emerged that Ukraine might be looking to become a neutral state, which means that it will not join NATO, but only if the West provides security guarantees. Do you think that right now that's a good decision for Ukraine to say we are not going to join NATO, but only if we get security guarantees from the West?
Well, I think that certainly it's understandable, given that it's in the middle of a war, and the challenge will be defining and making real those security guarantees that they might seek. Right now in Sweden and Finland, you have majorities of the population favorable to joining NATO, which is a large change from those two nations that have long been neutral. And I think it reflects what's going on more broadly in Europe, that people now see that Russia is a real threat. Ukraine is moving ahead with its application to join the European Union. It reportedly finished that paperwork and sent them in over the last few days. And just to mention another big thing that will be happening this week, all the finance ministers from around the world are going to be meeting in Washington for the World Bank and the IMF meetings. So there's going to be a lot of discussion of how to support Ukraine because it's suffering financially and economically, how to rebuild Ukraine, how to make the sanctions on Russia more effective to actually raise the price, the economic price for what's going on. So there'll be a lot of discussion this week in Russia on the non-war, in Washington on the non-war front issues of the Ukrainian crisis, which includes things like the food shortages around the world that are being, and price hikes which are being generated by this war.
Absolutely. Even here in Nigeria, it is one of the realities, the hike in food prices as a result of this war. But let's talk about, I saw an interview or a conversation with the former U.S. Secretary of Defense over the weekend, Leon Panetta, where he said that all Putin understands is force. I do not understand what he means by force, but he did make that statement. What do you think, and using the word force, what do you think will force Putin to come to the point of negotiating a resolution to this war?
Well, that is the major question right now. As far as all of us can tell, it certainly was not enticement. Many people tried to entice him to the table earlier, and he has suffered a number of small setbacks along the way and defeats, but he has doubled down in his commitment to this military enterprise. So I think it's going to take just firm resolve, the ability of the Ukrainians to fight back, the ability of their friends to continue to give them the supplies and the money that they need to do that, and then finding other ways to increase the costs for Putin and the pressure on him. I think it certainly is true that it's only going to be very serious pressure that's going to get Russia to reconsider. Otherwise, Putin is very much committed, it seems, to fighting on to try to get some kind of victory.
Do you think that Ukraine is perhaps only a piece in the puzzle here, that Putin is also maybe looking to expand into territories like Moldova, where you also have Russian-speaking people?
I certainly think that if he comes out victorious from Ukraine, he is going to move in that direction to Russian-speaking peoples all along the periphery of what is currently Russia. And so that is another reason that so many countries are so worried and think we can't let him succeed in this brute force to just grab land and people back. And as you remember, at first he said, well, he argued Ukraine is going to really like to come back to Russia. Most Ukrainians want to come back. Well, I think they've proven by their struggle over the past weeks that that's not the case at all. And my hunch is that many of those Russian speakers in other countries will also have serious doubts about being forcibly reabsorbed.
And just before we let you go quickly, what is that one, because people have talked about, or analysts have said, whether in Europe or across the country, that European countries need to stop buying Russian gas, and that perhaps is the most important sanction that Putin could face and force him to come to a resolution. But do you agree? And if not, what do you think is the one key here in terms of sanctions that could force Putin to come to a resolution?
Well, I think you're correct that if countries could wean themselves fast enough from Russian oil and gas, that would be a major, major pressure on Russia. The problem is that they, in Europe, are very dependent on that. So it really depends on how quickly other channels of supply can be developed. And of course, Nigeria is a very important channel of supply for the world in this area. But as you know, that takes time. And already we've seen some steps in that direction. I hope there will be more steps to tighten that grip on Russia, because that really will get their attention. On the other hand, I note that that would be a severe problem for a number of European countries. So I think we can look for ways to support them in making that move, and urge them to, and work with them to move in that direction, because it will be a major sanction on Russia.
And former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, former on Global Affairs, former ambassador to Mexico and Afghanistan, and senior advisor, Center for Strategic and International Studies on Prosperity and Development, Ambassador L. Anthony Wayne. Thanks for talking to us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.